If you're using a broken system to fix a broken system, how does it really fix it?
Historically, where we were taught about these are the patterns you use to write code so that the code is more maintainable, now you can actually throw away the code and start completely. So it's not as important for another human being to understand it. It's more important that an agent can understand it, right? Because an agent is built in a way where it's going to see, okay, what all do I have access to? What has this human asked me to do? What's my goal? And let me try many different paths.
Like, you don't know what they would become after all the human in the loop that you're giving them. So it's very, very hard to build engineering practices around that. So this is something that I'm deeply curious about.
The ability that many of these agentic platforms have is...
Well, welcome back to yet another episode of Ctrl+Alt+AI, and today I have a very special guest, Mayank, who's the Chief Security and Trust Officer here at Snowflake. I'm joining him at Snowflake Summit 2026, and I know this is one of the most difficult and unanswered topics that people want to learn more about, that how do you really secure agentic AI systems, and I'm here to pick Mayank's brain to learn all about it.
Well, thank you for having me, Aishwarya. It's a real pleasure. And I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Well, I have to start with this, right? Everyone is talking about building AI systems, using AI. So we're using AI to build AI systems or any other systems. Plus, we are somewhere using AI to secure these systems. So it's sort of a beautiful mess where you would say that, sure, AI can help you be fast at it, but most of the times when I'm speaking with people, they're like, how does it really work? Because if you're using a broken system to fix a broken system, how does it really fix it? So what is your perspective on using AI to secure agentic AI systems?
Right. Okay, so maybe I'll try and answer it this way. I don't necessarily think using AI to build systems is broken, first and foremost. I think what's happening is that there's a lot of code being created. So sometimes if you want to stay ahead of that curve and you want to review that code, it's important for you to also be able to scan it and find issues in it as fast as it's being created, right? But also another way to think about it is that you have people building agents outside of your enterprise who are probing your enterprise. And if these agents are moving at the speed of AI, if you don't build your defenses to operate at the speed of AI, you're not going to be able to stay ahead of that. So I think it's just two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, there is AI that is constantly challenging you because it's probing you or because it's generating new content. If you want to, keep up with that curve, you have to use AI on the other hand to monitor it, to sort of remediate things, everything that you do in the security world.
I totally get the life cycle that we are seeing right now. So in this spectrum, where would you say is a good place where using AI to do it is a strength? And where would you say human intelligence would come in, or human judgment would come in terms of safety?
Yeah. Look, there's actually many questions embedded in that, right? There's the age-old question, or actually the new question that everybody's talking about. If AI is doing everything, what is the value human beings bring, right? And I mean, we can talk about that. And then there's a different question in there around how much do you trust your AI? Do you bring the human in the loop? So maybe the easier one is that question, right? People, AI is still, people are starting to deploy AI for the first time. They haven't built as much confidence. So it's a little bit like, the first time you get into a Tesla with full self-driving, maybe, you don't quite get there. You just sort of, you're still holding onto that steering wheel really firmly, and then over time you get more confidence and you start to let go.
Yeah. So
as you build more confidence in your agentic systems, then you start taking a little bit more risk with it. So that's one part of that. And I think eventually, there's lots of controls we can talk about that we're building to give you more protection so the AI doesn't veer off the road and do something it's not supposed to. But eventually we'll get all of that figured out and you'll have that deployed. And then you get to the other question, what's the value of the human being? And I think human beings will always bring their creativity and the subject matter expertise along with that ingenuity, which is a human, right, is going to use AI in interesting new ways we can't imagine today.
Absolutely. That actually brings me to this interesting thing that we were talking about a little bit earlier, which is around how do you see the lines blurring between software engineering and safety and security? Earlier, it used to be a very siloed role. Software engineers are building, QA folks, security folks are making it safe. But now there is a good overlap, and you're like doing that right here at Snowflake. So what is the trend that you're seeing here?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. In fact, all three personas are sort of very related, whether it's QA engineers, software engineers, or security analysts or security engineers, right? So at Snowflake, we brought both the security operations team as well as our security engineering team together in one organization, because we think you get maximum value where you can build a lot of tools internally using AI that you would not be able to procure in the market at that same speed. And the world is changing so fast, like, maybe the industry outside isn't always creating new products at that pace. So you often have a lot of bespoke context about how your enterprise runs. And so when you use AI to create tools to solve the exact problem you wanted to solve, you can move much faster as a security organization. So definitely those two are blending. But you mentioned QA as well, and I think one of the really important things before you can embrace agentic development is to make sure you have the right kind of tests to know that the AI produced something, which is, especially if you're going to retire something that's already been around and you're going to rewrite it. Because one of the big debates happening in the security world is if you have old code and it has vulnerabilities, how much of it should you patch, and where should you just sort of replace that code, rip and replace completely with code that's been generated by agentically, right? So how do you know the new thing will actually work correctly in all the edge cases that the old code has historically learned to handle? So even having the QA taken care of, really, having all your test cases documented, make sure you understand all the critical user journeys. So when you write the new code, you can test it and make sure for correctness. So these are all part and parcel of this new software development lifecycle, which is super compressed, right? And actually, I call AI the great sort of neutralizer, where people who were not brilliant software engineers before can write code. It's now all about how you think about it. Perhaps you have to think about the systems which will interact, and you have to be a subject matter expert who knows what outcome you want to get, and then you can instruct and nudge the AI to get it for you. So it's amazing, right? The speed at which these things are changing and how everything is getting compressed into one.
It is pretty fascinating, and I would say, like, with the speed, individuals are able to catch up with this speed faster than organizations, because they have their own guardrails, they have their own legacy systems in place. So I'm curious about this, because a lot of times when I'm talking to people about, have you used that tool, and I'm using these connectors and plugins to do these automations, everyone's first question is this, which is pretty obvious, but what about security? That's a very valid question, because people are worried about, hey, my bank account details is going to go out, my personal information is going to go out. So I'm sure Snowflake as a company, where your moat or your strongest pillar has been data, when you are adding that AI layer to it and you're talking to enterprises, I'm sure, who are way more security sensitive than individuals, how do you go up with that conversation, which is you're adding this AI layer?
Right.
Here is how we think about security.
Right. Yeah. So the simple three-part framing is, you've got the model, and so you've got to secure the model, make sure the model doesn't get attacked, and we can talk about things like prompt injection. Then you've got the stuff around the model, which is the permission system, what is the agent allowed to do, the scaffolding, the harness, everything that runs the agent. How do you make sure it doesn't do anything you didn't intend for it to do? If you gave it all your permission, agents have certain properties where they're going to go and look under every single rock and try every possible thing they can do. So how do you put the right constraints around it? And the third piece is the security of the data itself, right? So you have to start from a place where your data has the right governance to begin with, and you've got the right permissions. And when you have all three of those, then you can sort of do this more confidently. Now, between an individual and an enterprise, obviously the bar is much higher for the enterprise, because they have customers who are depending on them, right? So you have that responsibility, and you don't take risk with other people's data. So the bar is much higher because of that.
Totally makes sense. And I know you mentioned about securing the data and thinking about data first and moving up from the stack from there. Traditional softwares used to use data for all of these years, decades before AI became this hyped as it is today. Companies have been using traditional SaaS with data. Data has existed. But now I feel there's a new beautiful terminology to all of it called context and context engineering, and it's all tying back to building AI agents. So there is a new lens of looking at data. Where would you say like there's new use case unlocks that you're seeing with organizations who used to connect their data from like a traditional SaaS lens versus now they are looking at it from AI capabilities?
Look, I think both the risk that comes in the system as well as the wonderful benefits you're talking about come from the fact that historically, when you build systems as a developer, you had to connect these different systems. You had to say, you know what, this is the goal I want to accomplish. So I'm going to have this system, call that system, pull data from here, then pull some more data from there, do some joins between them, do some analysis, and then send it over to this third system. But things were very fixed and very deterministic. So if you hadn't imagined a use case earlier on, or you hadn't imagined a more creative way to solve it, your system is set in stone, right? So you test it, you debug it, you say, okay, fine, it's accomplishing a particular goal, let me ship it. But now what the beauty of the agentic world is that these systems are almost self-wiring on the fly, right? Because an agent is built in a way where it's going to see, okay, what all do I have access to? What has this human asked me to do? What's my goal? Let me reason about it and let me try many different paths. If this path doesn't work, I'm going to back up and try something else. If that doesn't work, then maybe I'm going to try something else. So these things are constantly rewiring them, right? So that both brings this creative element to it, where problems which were previously hard to solve or which you would not automate and you had to have a human get in there and do mechanically, now the agent can solve for you. And we can talk about some examples from the security world in that case. But that's also exactly what the risk is, because let's say an agent has a lot of permissions because it inherited those from the human, and it really just needed to follow a narrow path to solve this problem. But you have no guarantee it's going to follow that narrow and straight path. It's going to explore lots of different things, and it might end up having side effects or cause some other damage it was not intending to, right? So that creativity and sort of its ability to experiment and like try different paths is also its disadvantage, and that's where security is very important.
You actually brought in a very, very interesting point here. It's also like a capability of like self-improving agents where they're trying to get better and better. And one of the fascinating parts, exactly what you mentioned, right? Like you don't know what they would become after all the human in the loop that you're giving them, or like all the reinforcement learning applications that you're building on top of it. It gets better and better over time, but you don't know what it would actually become. You don't know what that V3 or V4 version is going to look like. So it's very, very hard to build engineering practices around that. So this is something that I'm deeply curious about. Everyone talks about AI safety from a policy perspective, from best practices, and here is how you should be protecting it. But I'm an engineer at heart, and I'm like, how do I build it? Tell me, how do I actually build it out in practice? And Snowflake is probably one of the very, very few companies out there who have been able to build it in the pipeline, in practice, which can be tangibly seen. So what would you say is the thought process behind making it an engineering pipeline rather than principles?
Right. So look, I think these days a very big ability that many of these agentic platforms have is skills. And so you can basically encode many common sense rules inside skills. So the agent, so rather than shoving all the context and all the best practices inside, context which is given upfront in the prompt, you can have different skills and you can describe like, look, if you generate code, I want to make sure that you don't have buffer overflows, or if you generate code, I want to make sure that you don't have an authentication bypass, and here's how you would sort of check for certain things related to authentication. So you can create a ton of different skills in the enterprise, and then when code is generated, you could have the agent pick and choose the right skill which applies to that particular workflow or that pipeline, and automatically make sure that certain best practices are met, right? So every enterprise has got within whatever domain they are in, whatever industry they're in, they're going to have compliance needs, they're going to have security needs, maybe they have other business critical needs about if they're creating a pipeline that deals with customers, and you've got different kinds of customers and you have to treat them differently. These sorts of things can all be packaged in skills, and I think that's something which is a very practical way to scale out your sort of the best practices and checks and balances you want to put in. So that's something which everybody should be looking at.
That's actually a pretty interesting point that you mentioned. And I'm curious for this, right? You just shared a very tactical way to working through it. A lot of the times I feel people don't know where to get started. And what's interesting is till probably last year, AI engineering was one of the hottest role because everybody wanted people who are able to build these agents. And suddenly that role has toppled down and become, how do we actually build secure AI agents? So security has suddenly become like one of the top needs of companies.
Right.
But not a lot of companies are equipped to do that.
Right.
Whether it's startups, whether it's big enterprises who have not looked at it from a security lens.
Right.
So if you were speaking with the CTO, what would you tell them that here's how you should go about it?
Look, first and foremost, I would say make sure you pick the right platform for building your agents, right? So we're obviously very proud at Snowflake that we have a ton of stuff in those 3 layers I was talking about. When it comes to indirect prompt injection, or it comes to sort of protecting the LLM from being attacked from the outside, we've got some amazing controls which work at, which use a model to see what data is going into the LLM and make sure it's not trying to poison the LLM, right? So that's at that sort of foundation level. Then we have a number of things we're putting out this week, and you'll hear about them around agent identity. So when an agent is acting on your behalf, can you say, these are the limits to what it can do? Can you say things like, it's governed so an agent can't actually go and look at sensitive data perhaps, right? So putting those kind of controls around what agents are allowed to do, making sure when it's differentiating between when it's a human and when it's an agent, making sure you have good ways to audit agent actions. If something goes wrong, was it actually the human being who did it? Or was it an agent that did it on their behalf? Where was this agent running, right? Being able to debug these things. So that's that second foundation layer, and making sure you pick a platform which has a very robust set of controls there is very important. And the third thing we spoke about, obviously, was about making sure the data itself has strong governance rules, right? So it knows, depending on who the user is, got the right kind of RBAC. Make sure your permissioning is controlled. As we spoke about, these agents basically will try every possible path they can. So one of the most important things for people to do right now is that they sort of go back and take a look at what permissions have been given to human beings that their agents might inherit, right? So these are some sorts of things which CTOs and CISOs have to look at as they encourage their developers to pick an agentic platform. And we think this is sort of going to be the big unlock when you go from playing with these in-house to actually running it against your production workloads to make sure that they don't do something you didn't intend for them to do.
Absolutely. I absolutely love that advice. Like throughout all the conversations that we were having, I could clearly see this like software engineer in you, like trying to build a solution or like, trying to make it practical. You've been a software engineer for like last 2 decades?
3 decades.
3 decades. Yeah. We'll call it 2 decades. You've been like a software engineer since your start of the career, and the industry was very different. I would say just in the last 3 to 4 years, things have changed so drastically that every time I'm talking to somebody who wants to be a software engineer, they're like, I don't even know if my role is going to exist anymore. What would you give? Like, what would you give as a career advice to somebody who is interested in software engineering? Like, what is some very unfiltered top 5 advice that you would give them that, hey, here's what the future is going to look like. This is what you should focus on.
Yeah. Look, I think first and foremost, there's a lot that you can learn yourself now. Okay, especially you can use AI to learn a lot of things. You can learn you can process a lot of code much faster just using AI as a tool which helps you. I think you do need to understand your domain well, because the agents are still, all those agent trajectories are still being figured out, right? People don't, so sometimes when you can be a domain expert, a subject matter expert who goes and tells the agent, I'd like you to solve this problem, and here's how I can sort of create, maybe it's you're using LangGraph and you're creating these nodes which are all trying different things. How do you come up with those concepts, right? So being a subject matter expert is really, really important. Yeah. So I think more than software engineering as it used to be historically, where we were taught about these are the patterns you use to write code so that the code is more maintainable, so your peer can read your code and understand where the bugs might be. Now you can actually throw away the code and start completely. So it's not as important for another human being to understand it. It's more important that an agent can understand it, right? Those I feel are less critical. I think what's more critical is being that subject matter expert who can guide and nudge the agent, and possibly even understanding how large systems are connected at an architectural level. Because it could well be the case, and one day I think this will not be an issue either, because agents are getting smarter and smarter with more context, more memory. You're seeing how these coding agents are now finding vulnerabilities in software, right? So the amount of stuff they can sort of be aware at the same time and string things together is getting amazing. But I still think there is something to be said where you have to break down the different systems which will come together to build your end-to-end solution, and then you can perhaps have different teams look at the different systems individually. So figuring out the interfaces between them, figuring out what those large components are, there's probably some software architecture like thinking you still need to bring to the table. Because if you don't do that, then it's possible, like a lot of people who do agentic development also find that the code becomes like really hard for them to maintain, and they try to fix one thing and something else breaks, right? So I think being able to componentize at some reasonable granularity, having teams who are properly testing. We spoke about building the test cases, because each time, even if it's easy for you to throw away the code and rebuild it, you don't want to regress behavior for your users. So making sure that the test suite is exhaustive and you're able to run through it each time, these are the sorts of things which I think become more and more important.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I think there's no better way to end our conversation rather than saying that, hey, in a world where building has become cheaper and faster and more efficient, what makes a human human is that differentiator for us, whether it's critical thinking, whether it's system design, whether it's actually understanding what do you want to build with the AI systems, and being able to like contextualize it around user experience. At the end of the day, like product market fit is very, very human.
That's right. All these things are being built to serve humans. So, there has to be a human who says, hey, wouldn't it be nice if I had something which did this for me, right? And then that human can go talk to an agent and like try and figure out how to do that. But there is a lot of creativity that humans can still bring to the table.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Well, thank you so much, Mayank, for joining me for this conversation. I know this has been like one of the top questions that I keep getting around what's happening in the security space, how can AI agents be more secure and be more reliable. So I'm super glad that I had this chance to like speak with you more about it, and I'm sure people listening to this have learned a lot. There is still a lot of things that people need to understand from an AI security standpoint, and I'm glad we got to do this first.
It was a real pleasure. Thank you for having me, and look forward to another conversation some point in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.